See, now that's a very nice Led Zeppelin song. And it features the acoustic guitar in that instance of Jimmy Page. And the reason we're talking about Jimmy Page is I have in my hands a very big and very handsome tome entitled Jimmy Page, amazingly enough. The definitive biography by the definitive biographer Chris Salewicz, who's here with us now. Chris, welcome to the show.
Good morning, lovely to be here.
Oh, welcome back to the show, because you've been here many times,
That's
of
correct.
course.
That's correct.
And we've known each other a very long time.
That's also correct, and I'm very pleased that's the case.
And I still don't think of you as a rock man. I still think of you as a reggae man, or maybe a soul man, or you know, the Clash I understand because of all the sort of cultural links. But I never really had you down as sort of Led Zeppelin Jimmy Page.
Well, it's more about Jimmy Page. This is a book about Jimmy Page, the kind of you know, the magician archetype, really. That's what interested me. I mean, I saw Led Zeppelin several times.
Right.
I thought they were kind of great. I still think they're great, but I wanted to do a book about Jimmy Page because I think he's actually the greatest English rock star there's ever been, in kind of in every kind of level. You know, this is a guy who lives in a castle with a moat. He has the classic car collections that he can't drive. There's the immense collections of guitars, and he's utterly enigmatic. And on stage, what he always projected was like an air of mystery. It's like there's something going on. Who is that man behind the curtain? What's really going on there? Because of all his interest in the occult, and the arc of my book really is how in the 70s, when Led Zeppelin are at their peak, people were slightly frightened of Jimmy Page. Apparently, when he would go
something of the night about
there's something, you know, of the dark and the occult and what is really going on here. Although Guy Pratt, the super session player, said to me, "It's really clever, isn't it, pretending you're the devil when you're just a super collector."
Okay, let's go back to this.
But I was going to say, I'll just complete that, because but now he's seen as the kind of the quintessential English rock star. And in terms of almost a heritage act.
If you were writing the film script, it would be that one, wouldn't it? I mean, it's kind of, you know, of this bloke, as you say, who ends up in a castle with his...
Yeah, but exactly. But now, and also then goes through all the problems. He has all the drug problems, etc. Never gets busted. Does very bad drugs seemingly forever. Never gets busted, at least until the group are over. And now is completely clean and serene, as we say in the trade.
Let's go back to the start of the story then. Where does it begin?
Well, it begins in Epsom, where he grows up. And, of course, he grows up in the same region, you know, within about a 10-mile radius of himself, Eric Clapton, and Jeff Beck.
Which is extraordinary.
Which is extraordinary, but someone explained to me the reason those people come from there is because it's so boring. It's so boring. It's nothing to do but play guitar.
That makes lots of sense. If he'd have grown up in Soho, we'd never have heard of him again.
Exactly. So, and of course, he forms this skiffle group. Famously, he's on BBC TV when he's 12. You know,
really?
on a talent show. Yeah, you can find us on YouTube. Actually,
I'd rather not.
The Jimmy Page called the James Page Skiffle Group. So that's kind of like a bit of a revelation, because no one in those days had been on TV. This is 1958.
So is he from a middle-class family, or what?
Yeah, they're middle class, but it's a slightly lower middle class, you know. I think his father was a personnel manager in a plastics factory,
right,
you know.
Okay.
Which is...
There's no glamour there.
There's no glamour there whatsoever. The father, it also turns out to have had, you know, he had a secret family that no one knew anything about.
Really?
Which I think had a bigger, would have probably traumatised his son when he found out about that.
So we got this boy who starts off in a skiffle band, as so many did back in that period of time. Is he immediately a sort of guitar genius?
Yes,
Can he do all that stuff?
Yes. I mean, and there's the story of you know how, you know, the parents move into a new the house in Epsom, and someone has left a guitar there, a Spanish guitar. But in those days, in the 50s, people would have Spanish guitars on their walls as a sign of sophistication. So I think that's the story about that. Who no one knew. No. I think that's what. I think it was a decorative object. That's
right.
My suspicion. Anyway, he loves Elvis Presley. That's what turns him on.
Right. When does he become this kind of super session man? Because everyone knows that he played on every record made in England between 1960 and 1968.
Yeah. Getting much higher rates than anyone else, apparently. Yes, he becomes. he's kind of brought in by Decca Records actually initially, and so he's on them. He plays on them's "Baby Please Don't Go," but legendarily, people talk about that. That's his guitar solo on that tune, but it's not actually him. It's the actual them guitarist is actually playing that.
Right.
But he's playing with Bowie. He's playing. He's Tom Jones. He's on those. The James Bond film themes. He does all that stuff, and he's totally in demand. And Chris Blackwell said to me, Jimmy Page was a millionaire before he even started Led Zeppelin. Really, but also everyone knows he's very financially astute.
Yes.
And,
well, how about another word for that?
This is fantastic. When the second album is out, which is #1 in this country and in America, Peter Grant, the legendarily tough manager, finds out that when Jimmy Page is coming in for meetings, because he lives out in Pangbourne in Berkshire, he's hitchhiking it.
No.
And then, to save money.
Well, I'll tell you, I've got an update on that story.
God.
A friend of mine, and I'll tell you who it was afterwards, who knows Jimmy Page quite well, said that he saw Jimmy out the other week at on a train station. And he said, Jimmy, where have you been? Jimmy says, I've been up to look at some car somewhere or something. He said, and it's great because I've got an old age pensioner's pass now and I can get there for nothing.
But then they tell him that Peter Grant tells him he has to go on the train. But he'll only go second class and he's always surrounded by people. And then he says, right, I'm going to get a car to bring you in. He says, well, I'm not paying for it. And all the rest of the group had to pay for his car that brought him into the meeting.
So what's that down to? Is that down to coming from a sort of a small, lower middle class kind of careful background?
I think all those 60s musicians, Rod Stewart, for example, are legendary for their tightness. And there's a friend of mine who was one of those people who said, actually, it's because we were all so broke for so long.
Really? But you say Jimmy Page wasn't broke for that long. He was wealthy.
He wasn't broke for that long. He's just careful.
Now, all the sort of dark arts stuff that kind of is wrapped around the mythology of Jimmy Page and, capes and elves and spells. And
I think that's more Robert Plant, actually.
Is it?
I think, no, he's the one who's kind of into Tolkien.
Right. Well, what's Jimmy into then?
How to answer that legally.
He's certainly
look. He gets into he's into arts and crafts actually. He gets into Aleister Crowley at a very early age, at about 15. But what one has to remember, there's lots of people into Aleister Crowley. Then he's on
15.
He's on the front cover of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album. And in the underground press, he's like a kind of cause célèbre. But he really takes to it, basically. He does take to it. And he's interested in all that stuff, the Golden Dawn. And it's very much of his age. And you mustn't forget that kind of, 1971, Colin Wilson's book, The Occult, comes out, the massive tome. There's the Man, Myth and Magic. Partwork is being advertised on TV, the front cover of which is a painting by Austin Osman Spare, who is known as, this country's greatest unknown artist. Who is the greatest collector in the world of Austin Osman Spare? I'll give you one guess.
Jimmy Page.
That's correct.
The collecting side of him, has he always been an obsessive collector?
Yes. Yeah, and I know I don't know if you remember, Mick Jones from The Clash had his Rock and Roll Public Library, which was a collection of his archive. And Jimmy Page came and said, wow, you've got even more stuff than me. But he has all his suits are still in rows. They're neatly hung in Tower House, his fantastic home in Holland Park.
What about his kind of personal life and romantic liaisons and all that sort of stuff?
Complicated.
Tell us more.
Probably not as excessive. I mean,
no.
You don't hear
a lot about it.
It's not really. All the stuff that's going on in Led Zeppelin largely isn't him.
Right.
There's the I can't repeat on the radio.
No, please don't.
Some of the things that happen, but it's largely not him, and he seems to have romances.
Right.
I mean, obviously there are dalliances from time to time, but he just has romances, which actually go on for quite a long time.
And you mentioned the drug intake, which again was hardly unusual in that period of time among guitar superstars.
Quite, exactly. I mean that's just it. It was, I think someone said to me recently, the thing about doing drugs in the 60s and 70s is we didn't know you shouldn't do too much.
No one told you
I
that.
told them that.
So they did. I mean, that was the other line from them. Well, how do you know you've done enough until you've done too much?
Exactly.
How important? I mean, we mentioned Led Zeppelin, obviously, and you say he was this sort of, he's already incredibly successful.
They were the biggest band in the world in the 70s.
Were they?
I mean, absolutely enormous. And the thing about Zeppelin is, it's unlike the Rolling Stones, who had this sort of decadent facade. The fans of Led Zeppelin, it was almost like a cult.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the Church of Led Zeppelin. In fact, when they did that reunion gig in 2007, a friend of mine described it as like going to the Church of Led Zeppelin. And it was, no doubt that mythology, as you say, the capes and elves stuff, is part of it. That's kind of part of the backdrop. But essentially, what you really have is this man who is an utter mystery. And as I said, people were frightened of him.
Is there much beneath the mystery?
Yeah, there's quite.
Is there?
Yeah, this is like. I mean, essentially, what Led Zeppelin is.
Because sometimes a man of mystery is a man of mystery because it's
you
pretty dull.
can tell. No. I mean, the very idea of Led Zeppelin really is it's like his art piece.
Right.
Like all those other two guys, Clapton and Jeff Beck, they all went to art school.
Yeah.
And what he learns about when he's being a session player is how to create records, how to produce records, how to put them together. So he produces all those records.
Right.
And that's why they sound so fantastic. But it's his art piece. It's not just, this isn't some just commercial idea.
So he's not just the guitarist in Led Zeppelin?
No. It's his entire. Led Zeppelin is Jimmy Page's project. It's
Right.
his art project. The others, and he assembles the group in that manner. It's like the sort of architect. He's the architect of the entire project. He brings those guys together, which is why he stands. In so many of those pictures, he's standing at the back. As he's got his arms around them.
Yeah.
It's like they're his possessions. He's earning more money than the rest of them as well, incidentally.
Does he have mates? Does he have bunches of guys around?
Yes, he does.
Does he?
He does. A good friend of his was, I'm sure you know him, Jeff Dexter.
Yeah, I know Jeff very
they
well.
They used to hang around. They would go to Liberties to find material.
I'm surprised
for
he hasn't
shirts and
bought
trousers.
Liberties.
Yeah, well, probably
His
too
collection.
expensive. But they would go to cutters in Soho and get clothes made up, as one did in those days.
Yeah.
Jeff speaks very fondly of him. I mean, he's got loads of arty people.
Were people happy to talk about him?
Not everyone. But then there are others who are very happy to talk to him. There's a guy called Rod Wyatt who's at school with he's the guy who taught him how to tune a guitar, and he's just a kind of tremendous bloke, and he's still a mate of his. He has mates from back in the days who he still hangs out with.
Would he be a fun guy to hang out with?
He's often thought of as being a little bit difficult.
Yes.
But I've seen him out at things. I do remember at the launch of Paul Gorman's book about Tommy Roberts.
Yeah.
I introduced him to Tapazuki, who I was come with. I think they were both a bit bemused by who the other was.
That's a culture clash, if ever there was one.
I thought it'd be interesting.
Does he have children?
Yes, he's got quite a few children.
Does he?
I mean, kind of like, descending age.
Right. How old is he now?
He's 70. There is a good point I'm going to make. He's 73.
73. Does he? Is there more to come?
I've heard things that are going on. Yes, so we will find out. But you often, you're often told this. This is it. By the way, this is the 50th anniversary of Led Zeppelin.
Oh, is it?
In this month. I didn't know this when I was writing this book.
Right.
But August, there's all sorts of Led Zeppelin stuff going to go on, because the first time they rehearsed together, which was in Gerrard Street, was either on the 12th or the 19th of August. No one seems to be able to make up their minds about that. So there's, you're going to be hit with a deluge of stuff about Led Zeppelin and about Jimmy Page.
How does he get on with Robert Plant?
It's not that easy. I mean, essentially, Plant is the neophyte brought into the group, by the high priest.
Yeah.
And he who initially genuflects to him entirely, and does look like a frightened fawn caught in a car's headlights in those early photographs. But then as Plant matures, their relationship becomes very difficult, and then there's trouble over, after the show.
But there is in every great band, isn't there? That tension between frontman and, it's so, whether it's The Who or whatever, that tension is there in almost all of those bands.
Of course. But it just seems to continue, this difficult relationship, where people say, Plant just doesn't like him. Well, I don't know if that's true or not, but he can be quite acerbic about him.
Did you speak to him about Plant?
Did I speak to him about Plant?
Yeah. No, sorry, did you speak to Plant about him?
I have in the past, yeah.
What does he think?
Well, pretty much what I'm saying, actually.
He is a fascinating figure.
Exactly. Honestly, there is no other... Brian Jones, maybe, but Brian Jones passed away.
Yeah.
There's no other English rock star archetype like Jimmy Page. If you look at those early pictures, the crimps, he looks like a cavalier. In fact, Led Zeppelin kind of look like cavaliers. They sort of look at the beginning, There's absolutely no one like him with the air of mystery.
It's very interesting that you say he looks like cavaliers, because I wrote in the book The Way We Wore how hippies were cavaliers and skinheads were roundheads. Yeah. And it was this culture clash between a kind of a puritanical skinheadism and this sort of flamboyant cavalierism.
Absolutely, and they just behave like that as well. I mean,
and that sort of civil war went on in the playgrounds of our schools, and I was on the skinhead
side. Absolutely. You probably won.
They made more money. Very few people have made more money than Jimmy Page out of rock and roll.
Absolutely correct.
And if you want to know more about the man, this is it. This is the definitive biography. It's a big book, Chris. How long have you been working on it?
It took about 2.5 years.
Blimey.
I haven't recovered.
Do you know if he'll read it?
Huh?
Will he read it?
I bet he does.
Do you reckon?
Yes. Yes, someone who kind of worked for him rang up inquiring about it a few weeks ago.
How did that make you feel?
So I hope I'm not going to be turned into a toad.
I'm going to play a track called Gallows Pole to leave us with. Chris Salewicz, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.